Hey everyone, and welcome to Broken Time, a new series looking to deep dive into the key events and the key people that shaped the game of rugby league as we know it today. For the first episode, we have got a great guest. We have got the author of this fantastic book, Two Tribes, which tells the story of the Super League War and the events that led to the birth of the NRL. The author is renowned rugby league journalist Mr. Steve Mascord, who has kindly given up some of his time to talk to us today about the Super League War and the effects it had on the game in this country, as well as sort of the legacy left in Australia. Speaking of books, obviously, I'd also like to point you in the direction of Broken Time, which is written by my good self. It aims to tell the story of rugby league between 1895 and 2000 on a domestic, international scale. We cover all the big events from the first ever season of rugby league right the way through to the 2000 World Cup. All the details you need to know for getting a copy of either book are in the description, and Steve has also rather kindly given us a discount code, so if you want to purchase a copy of Two Tribes from his personal website, then there's a little bit of an incentive there for you to do so. Please make sure you are liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and also follow me on the socials as well. I'll put everything in the description, because this is your show as well as mine. And if you've got any suggestions for topics or guests that you'd like to see on the show, then please hit me up or slide into my DMs. But without further ado, we are going to get stuck into our chat with Mr. Steve Mascord, the author of Two Tribes. For your viewing pleasure, I hope you enjoy it, and I shall see you soon.
I think it's recording. Are we on? We are on. We are indeed on. So, as I mentioned in the intro, my guest for this inaugural episode of Broken Time is the author of the fantastic book Two Tribes: The Untold Story of Rugby League's Divided Year and the Birth of the NRL, which I have here, and I would thoroughly recommend. It's a great read. Please welcome to Broken Time, Mr. Steve Mascord. Steve, how are you doing?
Good, Dan. How are you? I actually took my glasses off because I thought it might be a bit unsettling that we look too similar. With beards and dark hair, and I was kind of scared when I looked at the picture, so I actually took my glasses off. I'll have to put them back on if you want me to sort of look anything up,
No, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. Thanks for joining us for this first episode. As the title suggests, we're going to talk. We're going to go into a bit of a deep dive about the Super League War and the effects it had on the game over here in Britain. But before we do, I feel that we're recording on the day of the funeral of the late Maurice Lindsay. So, you know, I'm a Wigan supporter, so Maurice had a profound effect on how I supported my club during my childhood. You interviewed him for the book as well, Steve. What was he like from your dealings with Mr. Lindsay?
Well, you know, we kind of in the media saw him as the ultimate. There's an Australian word, spruiker. Now it sounds disrespectful, but he was a ringleader. He was a magnetic personality. A lot of the kind of ideas or the things that happened during this period that we're going to talk about in the mid-90s, they happened because of Maurice. In fact, when Super League was outlawed in Australia, Maurice basically started something called Global League, which was supposedly organised by the players with no involvement from News Corporation. He was actually the sort of face of Super League in Australia for a year there, when it was the courts banned the actual employees of Super League, the John Rebos and David Gallops and Ian Schuberts, from doing anything. So Maurice landed in Australia several times and fronted the media and was very much the front man for Super League. And there are plenty of things. I mean, the World Club Challenge was conceived when he was drinking with Graham Lowe. The idea of a tri-series. I remember he came over to our hotel I think in 1997, with the travelling press corps with the Australian team, and said instead of having these tours, we're going to have all the countries in Britain or New Zealand, Australia at the same time, like rugby union do, and it seemed quite outrageous. Obviously, I'll tell you a story. I was at the World Cup final in 2017, and Tony Durkin, who's a great Aussie journo, said Maurice Lindsay's looking for you, and Maurice was. It was the week after that amazing semi-final at Mount Smart Stadium between England and Tonga, and Maurice wanted to remind me that it was the 1995 World Cup where Tonga were invited and Tonga pushed New Zealand at Wilderspool, and that this had all begun many years before, and I think Maurice was concerned about his legacy and concerned that he would not be forgotten, and I don't think there was ever any danger that would happen. I don't think he need not have worried, and I think we've seen from the outpouring of praise since he died that he needn't have worried.
No, that's a great point, and it's a good story as well. It seems quite fitting for the sort of character that Maurice was, that we've had the comparison. Brian Carney said it on Sky Sports News on the day that it was announced that he'd sadly passed. He was Rugby League's answer to P.T. Barnum for a lot of the reasons that you just discussed there. I don't think there'd have been that. It's commonly accepted that there probably would have been summer rugby in the UK with or without the intervention of Super League. But like things like the World Club Challenge, like the Tri Nations, and of course as well, he did a lot of things behind the scenes, such as the rescue in the 2001 Ashes series, which looked for all the world like it was going to get cancelled. But Maurice rather diligently, took the bull by the horns, and the series went ahead. I'm not sure who won that series. I'm sure you might be able to fill me in on that one.
Well, we'd know if it wasn't Australia. I think you'd.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So moving on. For those who are unaware, because this kind of intertwines a little bit. For those who are unaware, just kind of sum up what the Super League War actually was. The event that led to the birth of the Super League, and as you mentioned in your book, essentially the birth of the NRL.
Well, I mean, there were two things happening at the same time, and they didn't mix well. It depends on your point of view, but they certainly caused an explosion, and that was the expansion of the Australian competition from being a Sydney competition to being national competition, which happened in 1995, and the introduction of pay television to Australia. So the new clubs were run more on an American franchise model, Broncos, Reds, Warriors, etc., Cowboys. And the older clubs were basically run using poker machine money from licensed clubs in Sydney, which is the way it always worked in Sydney. So there was commercial tensions there, and then we had Rupert Murdoch trying to start pay television in Australia and needing content, and that's it. That's the most important. That's the sort of confluence of events that meant that we had a rebel competition. The newer clubs were more, as I said, business savvy. They looked more to the American model of professional sports, and they found someone. As I said, there's always seeds of discontent in the garden of rugby league, and Rupert Murdoch came along with a giant watering can. So as a result, we had two competitions in 1997.
It's interesting you mentioned the birth of pay TV, because there's some similarities to be drawn, I think, between the Super League in Australia and the birth of the Premier League in England, the top soccer competition, in the fact that Sky TV was in its infancy, and Rupert Murdoch, like you say, he needed content to fill his schedules, and it seemed that the two sort of almost went hand in hand, in the fact that English football was on an upward trajectory after the 1990 World Cup, and I say Sky Television was launching in this country, so it did seem as if the two were to go hand in hand. One thing that I wanted to touch upon there. You mentioned sort of like the American franchise model that the NRL still kind of uses to this day. Has it ever sort of been discussed at any point having a second tier competition and having promotion and relegation, such as the British model, like what we have in over here?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Cronulla and Penrith competed in what was called at various times a second division, but there was no automatic promotion and relegation. It's not exactly like the American franchise model because it grew organically out of suburban teams in Sydney. Of let's just see if we can raise a team to represent Glebe and raise a team to represent South Sydney, and we'll play against each other. And so it didn't really. It grew quite organically, but certainly during, and if you read the book, one of the many compromise models suggested and being tossed around in the middle of 1997 was that all the clubs, that's 22 clubs, all survive, and that there are two divisions, but only Sydney clubs can be relegated. So the expansion teams are guaranteed to be in the first division forever, and the Sydney teams go up and down. And that was one of the things that was discussed, and there just wasn't enough funding for that. So, so the answer is yes. It has been considered at times, but when you, I get into a very deep philosophical conversation here about the whole issue, but it's easier to have promotion and relegation when you can drive to every away game. When you have to fly to away games, and when in the mid-90s particularly you had reserve grade as well, and the Perth Reds had to fly for visiting first and reserve grade teams, you have to be a bit more circumspect in how you throw your money around and your competition structures, because otherwise it just becomes too expensive. So to have promotion and relegation, be sitting at the bottom of the second division and be flying teams in and out of Perth or Auckland, it just doesn't make sense. I know that the Toronto Wolfpack thought it did for a while, but it's much easier to have promotion and relegation and have some of these peculiarities, which to me, growing up in Australia, about British sport, and some of these attitudes that people have, this very romantic attitude about sport, when everything's in driving distance, when you throw in flights, and transcontinental travel, and a smaller market, it's much harder to do promotion and relegation.
No, that's an interesting point. It's one that seems to have been thrown about a little bit in Super League this season as well, because it seems to be a bit of a hot potato regarding whether or not Toulouse should be spared relegation this season, or whether they acquiesce, and if they do go down, they're replaced by Lee, Featherstone, Delete as applicable. So with that in mind, how important did the Rebel Super League competition see the British game as, in terms of trying to get them on board as an ally in this conflict that was brewing?
Put simply, if Kerry Packer hadn't threatened to personally prosecute directors of ARL clubs if they joined Super League wouldn't have happened in this country. If Super League, it's only because the ARL put up a fight with the support, particularly of Optus, which was the other pay television operator who had been given the rights basically by Kerry Packer. That it was seen as basically a tactical move to give the British game £87 million to side with the Super League movement. So, the summer Rugby League may have happened, and it may have stayed on Sky, but if the war had been over quickly in Australia, and basically Murdoch had got a cut of the rights for the 1997 season, or 1996 and 1997 seasons, there wouldn't have been Super League in this country.
That's really interesting. And at the time of the Super League sort of launch, there was silly money flying around with players being signed to big contracts, but on both sides of the divide as well. I know from reading his autobiography, Jason Robinson signed a contract with the Newcastle Knights to play in the, I believe they were Pro ARL. Just sort of skewing away from rugby league for a second. Obviously, there is at this time as well. There's the big decision to turn the other side of the rugby divide professional. Do you think that everything that was going on in terms of the Super League war might have actually helped rugby union to make that decision?
No, it prompted it. Michael Hill, who is the chairman of the Newcastle Knights, was actually working in rugby union at the time as well, and he is absolutely convinced, and a lot of historians are who know more about rugby union than I am, that the Super League war absolutely prompted rugby union to go to open professionalism. So it poked the line because the players they were trying to recruit players from rugby union, and rugby union was under threat. So definitely. The Super League war also prompted rugby union to become openly professional.
Yeah, most definitely. What one key event in the Super League war that kind of saw both sides come together from the both hemispheres was the 1997 World Club Championship. Now, if you're unaware of that, that was, instead of it being a one-off game between the champions of Australia and England, every single club aligned with Super League took part in a massive competition on both sides of the globe. And it's become commonly accepted that the tournament as a whole was a bit of a failure. What do you think they could have done better in terms of, I suppose, not making the competition a failure?
Fewer teams. I mean, not Maurice Lindsay, when I spoke to him, said basically that it was going to be 4 against 4, and that Nigel Wood got up at a council meeting and said it's all of us or it's none of us, and so it became this just the most ridiculous. I mean, it was funny. It was funny. Like when Penrith played St Helens. I think St Helens had not won a game in the tournament, and if they lost by less than 18, they still progressed to the finals. Penrith had not lost a game in the tournament, and they needed to win by 20 points to progress because it was so lopsided, and because the finals were already set up so that half the teams had to be from Southern Hemisphere and half the teams had to be from the Northern Hemisphere. So it was actually like slapstick funny. It was actually hilarious, the golf. And there was so much. I mean, there was so many stories about how the Aussies got drunk the night before and didn't train and all this sort of stuff, and the things that happened on the field, the banter on the field, the things that happened between matches. You could write a comedy about the World Club Challenge or Championship in 1997. It was known as World Club Challenge in Australia, and the catch cry on the ads was with some guy with a northern accent saying, "We're not here for a holiday," and in fact, most of the people who played in it were in fact involved having a holiday on both sides. There's the same golf exists today. It would be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Gavin Willis is writing about it in The Guardian this week, and he said, was it just run poorly? No, it was a flawed concept because there's enormous golfing standards between the two hemispheres, and there still is.
Yeah, 100%. I'd be fairly confident, and this is me with my Super League fan hat on. I'm fairly confident that if a World Club Challenge was to happen tomorrow, the Australians will probably wipe the floor with the British teams. Obviously, there's one or two teams who might progress a little bit further than others, but yeah, it's like you say. There's the chasm between the two countries is still there. I don't know when it will start showing signs of closing, if it ever does. But no, you make a very valid point there.
Well, I mean, Mal Meninga's comment 25 years and 1 day ago from when we're having this conversation, after it was a 70-6, I think, win for Canberra over Halifax, and he said he's just said the media should stop criticising the competition because the English will only get better if they keep playing the Aussies. Now, that is actually quite an interesting argument because let's imagine that this competition continued for the next 25 years. All right. Now, would the standards be any closer? And I'd argue that no, because now back then there was more mystery about players, and you could get a gem on not much money, and you could do a bit of good horse trading there, and it is possible that a competition where the players are getting paid half as much, i.e. the salary cap is half, you could actually perhaps have some success. But knowledge and the technology and the sharing of scouting and all that sort of stuff, the sophistication of scouting now means you basically get what you pay for, and the Australasian clubs are spending more than twice as much as the Northern Hemisphere clubs. So therefore, the results would be the same. Even if they kept playing it for the next 25 years, it was on in the middle of the year every year for the last 25 years. I still think it'd be just as lopsided.
No, that's a very good comment, and I suppose that sort of transfers into the international game as well, which we will touch on briefly in a few minutes. But the Super League itself in Australia was held in 1997 and was won by the Brisbane Broncos. There was some innovations brought in by Super League, some of which might have survived to this day. What would you say is possibly the legacy of Super League in Australia and indeed in Europe?
That's a big question. I think that, in the rules, you've got, things like, you've got the tribunal system where everyone doesn't have to go before the disciplinary committee. There's just a system of penalties and that sort of thing, early pleas and all that sort of stuff. Many rules were trialled. The team that scores kicks off was trialled that year. The positioning of scrums. The video referee is a really big one. The video referee was first used in Super League in the Northern Hemisphere, actually, because it was outlawed the whole competition was outlawed in the Southern Hemisphere. Then the ARL caught up, although they didn't have it at the beginning of 1997. They trialled it and then abandoned it. The press conference. As a journo, before 1997, we all just stood around the coach in the sheds after a match, and then in 1997 they made them all sit down in front of a backdrop. There's just so many things. I think the ARL were kind of heading in that direction and may have got there eventually in many of these areas, and they're just basically, I guess the coverall term would be professionalism. The ARL were also resisting, certain things, and so Super League kind of kicked them up the bum and said that, basically did these things, and they ended up being adopted afterwards. I think Super League's legacy is a lot of the things that we see, in modern coverage now, and I guess, as I said, the video referee was one that really stands out. The interchange, also the fiddling around with the interchanges. So we had a completely open interchange in 1997 in Super League, and players coming on and off all the time, like American football special teams. And as we know, that those things have sort of ebbed and flowed in the years since, the one extreme to the other. The nines, is something that, although we did have I think we had a nines in this country as early as 1988. There was a first proper experimenting with nines in 96 and 97, and we still dabble in it, but we still don't really know what to do with it. So, yeah, I think it's reflective of rugby league, really. It basically fast forwarded a lot of things that might have happened in the end anyway.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Without wishing to give too much of the story away, at what point did the peace talks commence, which ultimately led to the birth of what we now know as the NRL today?
Yeah, probably in March or April and Neil Whittaker started meeting Ian Frickberg, and it was mostly in secret, to such an extent that concierge were leaving keys at reception of hotels, and they'd be collected separately. And reservations for meeting rooms were being made, under pseudonyms and all this sort of thing. So Jeff Carr, who was the communications manager at the ARL at the time, he was former CEO at St George. He played a big role. He loved to go out jogging, and he ran into Ian Frickberg one day in Clovelly, and Ian Frickberg said he'd like to talk to Neil Whittaker, and subsequently they organised one of these clandestine meetings. So these meetings were happening pretty much all year, and everyone in the know believed there would be one competition in 1998, not two, and it was just a matter of how they got there.
No, that's fair. Was there ever sort of plans for the Super League and the ARL premiers to meet in sort of like a Super Bowl style fixture?
Yeah, in fact, there was a booking made at the Sydney Football Stadium for that game in October 1997. It was never played because the peace deal was only brokered, or peace deal was only kind of sealed on Christmas Eve, really, when the funding was secured. So because there was no guarantee that there would be one competition, there was no reason to deal with the other league. Why would I give them any credibility by playing against them? We don't even know if we're going to be in the same camp next year.
That's fair enough. Towards the end of 1997 as well, there was a test series between a Super League Australian side and the Great Britain team. One that I remember quite vividly because I remember watching the second test at Old Trafford and reveling in a Great Britain victory over Australia, which I'd not seen too many times in my 7 years on the planet at that point. 6 years, sorry. What was the build up to that like in Australia, given that it's still to this day not being given official test status by the Australian Rugby League? Was it sort of a similar sort of build up to what you'd experienced for an Ashes series, or was there a little bit of difference about it because of the fact it, for want of a better phrase, it was essentially a rebel team coming over to play instead of the Kangaroos that we knew?
I can't answer your question because I was here. I covered the tour. So I honestly don't know how it was received in Australia, but I know that obviously with everyone focused on peace and the domestic scene the following year, it wouldn't. And, at this point, I guess it was the beginning of the end, really, for the high profile that, Ashes games have in Australia. It's just not a big deal at the, games against international opposition. It's a fraction of the profile and public interest of state of origin. But in 1994, when I came over with the Kangaroos and covered that tour, it was a very mainstream event. So the credibility of international rugby league in the eyes of the Australian rugby league consumer, nosedived. Was set on fire during the Super League war, and it's not been rebuilt.
No, that's interesting you say that, especially this week with the first State of Origin match taking place. And you're right, we are still feeling the effects of that to this day in terms of the international game. It does sort of feel like it's been damaged. I don't want to say irreparably, but it took a severe blow. It would be like Brazil and Argentina not taking part in the World Cup in football, or Australia and India not wanting to play in the Cricket World Cup. So obviously we've touched on how the NRL was born at the end of the conflict. What do you think the future holds for the NRL? And I suppose the main question I want to sort of ask here is, could anything like this ever happen again?
Well, the way I understand it, the franchise agreements are so draconian now. So if Canterbury, the way it could happen, well, I'm sorry, I'm trying to answer the question two ways at once. They're so draconian now that if Canterbury wanted to quit the NRL, they would have to call themselves something else, use a different badge, play at a different stadium, and the NRL could immediately set up a team called Canterbury Bulldogs, playing at, based at Belmore, wearing that jumper, and just replace them, because the agreements that tie the clubs to the league have become far tighter as a result of the war and as a result of the rebellion. But I think we did see a hint of it, an echo of it, when COVID occurred, when Channel 9 basically leveraged, and Hugh Marks, who was at Channel 9 at the time, he was involved 25 years ago. He just started in the Super League war, and he actually helped negotiate the deal between Channel 9 and Super League. It was one of his first things he did. But was going to say, we saw a hint of it there, where Hugh Marks said, "There's too much money being spent at headquarters. We don't buy stuff off the NRL. We buy content off the clubs. Clubs should have more power. Blah 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 blah." And as a result, the Todd Greenberg was dispensed with as CEO of the NRL. The NRL gave back a lot of money to Channel 9 under the cover of COVID, which Channel 9 subsequently gave to Rugby Union, and to buy rights to Rugby Union. And the NRL have since dismantled their own in-house digital operation at the behest of the broadcasters. So when I asked Brent Reid, who's the Australians Rugby League reporter, about the Super League war and whether it could happen again, he said, "We don't need it to happen again because the clubs run the show now." So I think the NRL is now completely beholden to its rights holders under Peter V'landys. So they've decided to go back to a very old-fashioned model, where which is very similar to when Kerry Packer threatened to sue all those directors, or all those years ago, where basically they do what they're told by their rights holders. They rely completely on News and Nine for their income, and they are basically a contracted content provider to those two organisations. That's where I see the NRL now. So could it happen again, where someone, say an ESPN or an Amazon, comes in and wants to break up what is a duopoly now? It is a duopoly. I think perhaps it could, but it all comes. There's always disenchanted, and we can see now, right, with the NRL and the New South Wales Rugby League going to court. Okay, the New South Wales Rugby League and the NRL were in court fighting each other, right? Just recently. So let's say ESPN and or Amazon wanted rugby league in Australia, and the New South Wales Rugby League has access to Newtown and North Sydney and St George and Illawarra and Balmain and West. And they just said, and they came in and said, "Well, we want to show all these traditional clubs. Would you break contracts and blah 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 blah." We've already seen the fissure there. So if someone came in and actually replaced the NRLs paying for the funding that the NRL gives to the New South Wales Rugby League every year, then I think it could happen again. So, but it is all about how deep are the pockets? What is the commercial imperative? The breakaway could have happened at any other time, but no one had the deep enough pockets. They didn't have a motivation to give the game that much money. So if the commercial motivation was to arise again, and we don't know what direction technology might take, for all we know, the games are going to be played as holograms in our living room, and some hologram operator might come in and want rugby league, and because, and this is the danger with Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo aligning themselves so closely with traditional media, is that the opportunity through technological advances could prompt a similar event. So I think it is possible, but at the moment, the current environment. And again, it may not even be media. We don't know what's around the corner. The last war was caused, by a media, but there could be another industry that can disrupt rugby league and professional sport in the future. We don't know what that industry is. So it's a long way of answering your question, but basically, if a commercial, there are enough upset people in rugby league, both here and in Australia, that if someone came along with a lot of money, you wouldn't, if you're driving the bus, you wouldn't have any trouble attracting passengers.
No, I think that's a good analogy to use, and it's interesting that you actually touched upon someone like Amazon, because obviously we're now, it's like you say, technology has advanced to the fact that we are now in an age where it's not just a case of, I mean, in this country, obviously we have 5 terrestrial channels. It is the multi-channel era on satellite, but it's also streaming. It's YouTube, it's Apple, it's Amazon, it's Netflix. It is a melting pot, and I think if one of those companies was to come along to either the Super League or the NRL, they do have the power to be able to cause a lot of friction. And yeah, like you said, if you are driving the bus, it's easy to pick up passengers.
Well, and the big thing is also that I remember the conversations that we were having in 1994, 1995, where Ken Arpison and John Quayle were talking about setting up their own TV station, their own with pay TV coming in and this sort of stuff. And the fact that traditional legacy media bullied the ARL into, and this is what happened, right? They bullied rugby league men into honouring a contract that they themselves devalued by signing with Super League in January of 1997. So they walked into a room and said, "We've got a contract with you, and if you don't honour it, we'll sue you." And then they jumped into bed with the rebellion a year and a half later. So we now have gone the full circle where the rugby league authorities in Australia did set up their own station. They had their own digital over-the-top operation, which was making $1 million a year through, the advertising and through selling tickets and merch and stuff like that. And they were bullied once more by traditional legacy media into abandoning it. And now they're in, and now, as you point out, now they're in a similar position of vulnerability, and all it takes is a disruptor to come in and do the same thing again.
No, that's really good. I'm conscious that I'm slightly running out of time, so I'm going to give the next sort of 2 or 3 minutes over to yourself to give a description of the book Two Tribes, and you can point people in the direction of where they can purchase a copy if they rather scandalously haven't got one already.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm working on the Kindle version at the moment, so going through, and we doesn't have an index at the moment, so doing an index and going through with correcting, quotation marks facing the wrong direction, and this date might be wrong or something like that. So it'll be out on Kindle sort of second half of 2022. But I'm happy to offer everyone watching a discount code, which will be just broken time, I guess, one word, broken time, and you enter that at checkout at either shop.stevemascord.com or stevemascord.com. Now, shop.stevemascord.com is if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, stevemascord.com is if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's /product/Two Tribes, or just go to the websites and you'll find it, okay? I don't want to confuse people. But then at checkout, just put in broken time, and it'll be, what is it? I think it's £1.99 off in the UK, and it'll be $2.50 off in Australia with that code. And the journey's because we're going through the 25th anniversary now, I'm planning to go around to as many of the clubs that played in Super League in 1997. Believe it or not, I started with Paris and London. I've got those out of the way, and do little book launches and meet people and blah, 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 have a few beers. And I'm going to do the same thing in Australia at the end of the year. So I'd be happy to hear anyone's suggestion. If their local team is in Super League in 1997 and there's a pub or a bookstore or anything, even the club, if they've got a corporate function or whatever, supporters club, I'm looking for venues. So I'd love to hear from anyone. And the email address is that you can reach me on is touchstonesbook@gmail.com, which obviously gives me the opportunity to mention my first book, Touchstones, which is still available.
No, that's fantastic, and I'll speak on behalf of all the viewers on saying thank you for popping that discount code in, and I will make sure I put that in the description of this episode. It's funny you mentioned that the book launches of going to every Super League club. Off air, we were discussing sort of who my nearest club is, and it's a crying shame that neither of the Hull clubs were in Super League in 1997. Because I would quite happily hop on the bus and come and have a beer with you.
There's no reason not to come to Hull. I did try to get into one of the bookstores there, and I didn't. I think Waterston's. I was having some conversation and didn't come to anything. So there's no reason not to have I'd be stupid not to have a Humberside launch. We've got half a season left, so hopefully I can make a tie in with the match.
Well, if anyone from Hull FC or Hull KR is watching, then please get in touch with this man, because I feel like I owe him a beer for this. But thank you very much for your time, Steve. It's great chatting with you. All that remains for me to say is thank you ever so much for joining me. To you, the viewers, as well, thank you for joining us. You can find me on Twitter at Dan_BarkerGray. Where my people want to find you, Steve?
I'm at Steve Mascord, and you can find me also on Instagram as Stevis, and you can find me on Facebook. I think it's / might be / is it / Steve Mascord or / Bondi Beat? Bondi Beat's a column I used to do in Open Rugby in Rugby League World. I think it's / Steve Mascord now. So yeah, and the book is everywhere too. So it's Two Tribes 1997 on Facebook and Twitter as well. Yeah,
that's fantastic. So all that remains for me to say is thanks so much for joining us. Make sure that you're liking this video, subscribe to the channel as well to see more things as they happen. And we'll be back next month with another great episode of Broken Time. So until next time, thank you very much.